Hi everyone. For anonymity, I'll be using fake names for this post. My wife Kara, 29 female, and I were married for 3 years, and we were two love peas in a pod. When Kara and I first met, I didn't think I would spend my life with another woman apart from her. I had this certainty about her, and from first sight, I knew she was the one for me. Also, the increase in my heartbeat confirmed that as I approached her to speak to her. The first time I saw Kara was at a distant friend's birthday, which I was dragged to attend by another friend. She was sitting with a group of friends, and they were all chatting loudly and drinking. It was a late-night party, and there was so much to drink, but I didn't drink more than a glass, because I wanted to be in the right state of mind for work the following day. The thing is, I used to be a timid person, and approaching ladies, gorgeous ladies like Kara, was a big deal for me. My friend, who dragged me to the party, noticed that I could not take my eyes off her since we arrived there, and without asking if I wanted to, he ordered the waiter to send her an expensive bottle of champagne and tell her it was from me. After it was delivered, I noticed that all her friends at her table turned in my direction, and they all smiled simultaneously. Then she smiled, raised her glass, and mouthed, "Thank you." Almost immediately, my friend pulled me from the chair I sat on and asked me to go and say hi to her. He knew I had been single for more than 4 years, and he wanted me to maximize my once-in-a-blue-moon pull of attraction I felt. He knew I wouldn't like the idea, but he kept insisting, and after persuading and trying to convince me for nearly 15 minutes, I summoned the courage, walked to her table, and asked if we could talk privately. Her friends excused her, and we sat at a different table. We didn't say a lot that night because I was stunned by her beauty, and to be honest, it had been years since I talked to a woman about something that wasn't work-related. I worked as a programmer at a prominent tech firm in our city and considered anything other than work a waste of my time. We introduced ourselves to each other, and I found out she was currently doing her pay-to-D, even without saying so much. I'm sure my constant blushes and ear-to-ear grin had given me out that night. When we delved into her work life, I discovered she worked part-time as a junior writer/editor at a publishing company, and I believed her because she sounded intelligent, and there was something about the way she spoke. After our little chit-chat that night, we exchanged contacts, and I left the party because I had to rest for a few hours before going to work the following morning. We had our first official date about a week later because I was caught in the web of deadlines, and she claimed she was busy too. Our first date was more fun than the night we met. We talked about so many things, and I loved that she was very free-spirited. She smiled and laughed wholeheartedly, and it was evident that she enjoyed our conversation and our time together. After our first date, we hung out more often and visited each other's apartments. Before we started dating, she would come over to my place on weekends, and we would try cooking a meal together from a cookbook, baking pastries with strange names, or we would just do something fun. As weeks passed, we got closer to each other, and I could not go to bed without thinking about her every night. I saw all the signs that convinced me she was the one for me, and I kept imagining what it would feel like to spend the rest of my life with Kara. As friends, I took her shopping and got her flowers and the things I knew she loved. I knew she loved me too, and I also knew she wanted me to ask her out. Her body language said it all, and eventually I did, and she said yes. For me, money was not a problem. I was well paid, and most importantly, I loved to spoil Kara because it made me happy. We ended up dating for only 13 months, and we got married. We had a beautiful beachside wedding. Kara wanted that since childhood, and I was happy to do that. The wedding was small because we wanted to use part of the money for our vacation, and we did that. The first 2 years of our marriage were heaven on earth. Kara and I were much more in love with each other than when we were dating. Our bond grew stronger, and we literally did everything together. In fact, I only had breakfast, lunch, or dinner if I had it with Kara. We would eat together in the morning before she left for work. Lunch would be at a restaurant close to her office, and we always had dinner together when she returned home. Even when she had to spend extra time in the office, I always waited for her to come home so we could eat together. Aside from eating together, we had the rule of going to bed early so we could bond, get intimate, and talk about random things before sleeping off. Already in our first year of marriage, I had been promoted to a senior programmer in the firm I worked for, and my work became 100% remote unless I chose to go to the office. Kara was also done with her PhD and now working full-time as a writer/editor in her publishing company, which also came with an increased workload. Unfortunately, a year after Kara started working as a full-time editor for the publishing company, she got laid off. The company was cutting down on staff, and Kara also had to go. This was in the 3rd year of our marriage, which changed many things between us. Being sacked took its mental toll on her, and she slowly became depressed. We no longer talked like we used to or did our usual weekend cooking tradition. She became a shadow of herself, and it hurt me to see her that way. I even offered to double what she was paid at the publishing company, hoping it would brighten up her mood or cheer her up, but it didn't. She told me she wasn't working there because of the money, but because it was always her dream to work as an editor in that particular organization. Despite shuffling our house and her parents' house, Kara was still not herself, and I was becoming more concerned. It wasn't until a friend of mine recommended that she talk to a therapist, and that was when we began to see changes. Slowly, she became more active and the vibrant, cheerful woman I used to know. She met with her therapist 3 times a week, and I even insisted that she made it 4 times a week because I was impressed with the results I saw. I wanted her to be fully back to how she used to be, so bad that I didn't notice something else happening between her and the therapist. I was cleaning the house to surprise her the day I found out. She had gone to her parents' house the previous day, and I didn't want her to come home and clean. I even went grocery shopping to make her favorite meal and got scented candles to make our dinner special. I cooked first so I could clean up at once. I was in our room cleaning and folding clothes in the wardrobe when my hands touched a small journal that was partly tucked under a pile of clothes. I pulled the journal and realized it was from her therapist because it had the company's insignia on it. I know I should not have read it, but I was curious about what she had been journaling. To my greatest surprise, I found out Kara and her therapist were having an affair, and she journaled every bit of it. I was speechless and heartbroken. I went through the journal again to be sure of what I had read, and the content didn't change. Kara was cheating on me, and she was unapologetic about it. She even wrote about how her therapist was better in bed than me. I've got to admit, I was hurt and cried like a baby that day, and everything I planned for us was ruined. I laid on our bed for hours, and when it dawned on me that what had been done, I wanted them to pay for hurting me. I took pictures of the journal and filed a complaint to the therapist's office. I even took the journal with me in case they had doubts, and they were disappointed when they read it. When Kara came home that day, I told her I dropped by the therapist's office, and she was surprised. When she asked why I did, I dropped the journal on the table, and she began to cry. Immediately, she started begging me, but there was no way I would listen. Reading her journal broke my heart, and I could not forget all I had read. I kicked her out of the house and threw her stuff on the porch. She was so embarrassed and could not move, so I called her parents and asked them to come and get her off my property. In addition, I mailed the photocopy pages of the journal to Kara's grandmother, who was very fond of me, and she was taken out of her grandmother's will. Her parents begged me to not tell her grandmother, but that was my ultimate revenge plan. Ultimately, we got divorced, and her therapist had his license revoked. It was good that we didn't have kids yet, so it was easier for me to move on with my life. Kara became depressed and more miserable after we divorced, and I am glad she had to live with her parents' disappointment and shame. She called the house several times to beg me to take her back, but I wanted nothing to do with her. The last time Kara came, she met another woman and attacked her. I was so mad that I called the cops on her, and after that, I filed for a restraining order, and that was the last time I saw her. As for the woman she saw, we broke up because I was still hurting, and I have not completely moved on, but I'm glad I'm making progress. OP, you handled the situation maturely and gave her a taste of her own medicine. Despite being a good husband and trying to support your wife, she still chose to cheat on you with her therapist. I know the things you read in a journal must have broken your heart, but you should understand that humans are full of disappointment, no matter how close we are to them. It's sad things ended that way, but you should be glad it did. She probably hates you for ruining her life and taking her out of the grandmother's will, but revenge is best served cold. Thank you for sharing your story with us. Now let's move on to the second story of the day. The first time my wife and I met was at a small restaurant near my workplace. That day, I went to have lunch with one of my colleagues, and I could not ignore her sitting alone. I was used to approaching girls and sweeping them off their feet with my sweet lines, and I thought I would get lucky with my wife. But she completed the line I wanted to use on her before I did. I was impressed to see that, but it also meant she would be a tough nut to crack. And like I had predicted, she was. Instead of blushing and smiling like other women, she locked her eyes with mine, faked a smile, and continued eating her food. That was my first time being ignored like that by a woman, and it was embarrassing because everyone's eye was on us. Still, overall, I found her attitude very charming and different from the rest of the women I had met. I kept talking to her without getting a response, and finally, after I tried so much, she smiled. When she smiled genuinely that time, I knew I had broken through her high walls, and with a snap of a finger, we were talking and laughing together. The conversation we had felt like we had known each other for a long time flowed freely and naturally. Despite being complete strangers, we chatted like best friends who had not seen each other in a while, and at the end of my 30-minute break, we exchanged contacts and Facebook handles. There was something I was looking out for, and when I saw that, I asked her out. I was convinced we were a perfect fit, and I didn't want to make the same mistake I made with my ex-girlfriends. Of course, she said yes, and we became inseparable. We even wore matching outfits occasionally because she thought it was sweet. We dated for 9 months before we married, and though my friends thought I was moving too fast, I didn't think there was a better time to officially make her mine. About 2 weeks before our wedding, I leased a bigger apartment, and we moved in when we returned from our honeymoon. The first year of our marriage was splendid. I had never been deeply in love like I was with my wife, so I did anything I could to make her smile every day. Before we got married, I noticed that my wife was fond of my stepbrother, and she often talked about him when we returned from our family hangout. My stepbrother was a gym instructor, and as a result of that, he was heavily built. He was also handsome, and the kind of guy ladies love to be around. In the past, I had female friends who abandoned me the moment they met my stepbrother, and this mostly had to do with his looks. Since my wife had 3 older brothers and was used to being around guys, I believed she also saw him as her brother. I never suspected that her talking about his looks and how well-built he looked was her subtly telling me that she was into him. I was even glad that she had a way of always bringing him into her conversations, as well as her brothers. This was because I wanted our families to be one big happy family, and I didn't want her shutting out my family members, including my stepbrother. I had been with him since I was 13 and he was 17, and I didn't want anyone to come between the bond we shared. On my 28th birthday, my wife decided to throw a surprise birthday party for me at home, and she tricked me into coming home early from work that day. I had to take the family emergency excuse to leave work early, only to go home to a packed house. My parents, stepbrother, and some of my friends were there, and my wife's parents and her older brother were there too. The surprise worked, and I was so happy to see everyone at my house that evening. It was a small party with a lot to eat and drink. By this time, our marriage was already 1 year old, and we didn't have any children yet. After eating and drinking, everyone decided to hang around, since they were mostly family members and close friends. Also, it was pouring heavily outside, and no one had the excuse of going to work the next day since it was a Saturday. Everyone in the room was an adult, and in no time, we were arguing about politics and our economic crisis. The conversation grew intense as we all tried to outtalk one another, and that was when I noticed my wife was not with us. I didn't even notice when she left because she was sitting behind me, so I asked around for her. Everyone said they had not seen her until her mom casually said she had seen her walk down the corridor with my stepbrother. At first, I didn't want to go and look for them, but after some minutes, and I didn't see them or hear their voices, I excused myself. Walking down the corridor, I paid attention in case I heard voices, but I didn't hear a sound. When I didn't hear a sound, I felt something was wrong, but I couldn't tell what it was. As I approached our room, I began to hear soft, muffled moans, and my heart nearly dropped in my stomach. I walked closer to our room, pressed my ear against the door, and could not believe what I heard. I was devastated and heartbroken, but I had to keep myself together. A part of me wanted to go in there and give them the beatings of their lives, but I knew it would only complicate things. So I slowly pushed the door open, and luckily they didn't hear a creak because they were so busy. I turned on my phone video recorder, recorded them, and quietly returned to the living room. About 15 minutes later, my stepbrother returned first, and some minutes later, she came in. She changed her clothes and took her bath so no one would suspect anything. When we were complete, I asked if everyone wanted to see a movie, and they all agreed. Then I told my wife to go and make popcorn for everyone. While she was making the popcorn, I transferred the video I had recorded to my flash drive so I could plug it into my large screen television. We were settled as soon as the popcorn was shared with everyone. I played the video, and though they did not understand at first, their mouths eventually fell when they watched the video. My wife and stepbrother were the most surprised ones, and they could not say anything or defend themselves. They sat there speechless. Our parents were shocked and disappointed, and none of them could say anything. They were all ashamed and expected me to react in a certain way, but I didn't. Immediately after the video ended, I asked my wife and stepbrother if they liked the movie, but they couldn't maintain eye contact. Funnily enough, it stopped pouring at the same time, but no one made an attempt to leave. When my wife could not bear the silence anymore, she started crying and begging. Her mom was so angry that she yelled at her, but she didn't stop. I went into our room and packed her things so she could leave with her parents, and eventually she did. No one dared beg on her behalf, not even her parents. My stepbrother left before my parents, but what he had done caused a rift between us. Everyone left that day with their heads buried in shame, especially my wife. And there's no need to ask if I divorced her because I did. It was even worse because I never spoke to her again. I didn't only cut ties with her, I did with my stepbrother too, and things never remained the same in my family. It's been 2 years now, and I'm finally able to tell this story because I have been able to let go. Though it hurt a lot, and I still don't think she deserved forgiveness, I had to do it for myself. I met another woman, and we're taking things one step at a time. OP, why would you keep hurting for a woman who cheated on you with your stepbrother, not minding that the whole family was in your house? That's pure evil and disrespect. Both of them were toxic, and you did the right thing by cutting ties with them. That was the height of betrayal, and none of them deserves to be in your life. I do not think she would have only cheated on you with your stepbrother. Maybe she would have done the same with other attractive men, so consider this good riddance of taking out the trash. I hope you are able to heal from this. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please feel free to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also, comment below with your thoughts on what happened. If there is a story you would like to share with me about your own situation or someone else's, then please do not hesitate to contact me. Take care.